I'm here with my friend Charles Bernstein, whom I love very much, an amazing poet, eminent poet. And with me, co-director, and Chris Mostaza, co-director of PennSound, a big fan of ModPo, longtime faculty member here at Penn, and an all-around good guy. Thank you for talking, and a fan and friend of Erica Hunt's poetry.
That is true. Old dear friend, and it's good to be back here at Kelly Writer's house.
Thank you, Charles.
And ModPo.
We're talking about invisible hands, and I'd like to ask you how or why can hands ultimately, finally be detected in the bric-a-brac of the world? Okay,
so this poem of Erica Hunt is from her collected poems, Jump the Clock. From her selected poems, Jump the Clock, which is easy to get in Nightboat Books, and it's wonderful to see it in context.
And originally in a book called Peace Logic.
Peace Logic, right.
Which makes sense here.
Absolutely. It's about like peace logic. Right.
Peace work, yeah.
Peace work. I also want to call attention to the performance because, she says it's sort of a sound poem and about things, which is a great term
sound.
For what it's about.
Sound.
But it's sound, and there is an enormous amount of sound play. But she, when you hear her perform, it brings the poem into such a rhythmic and powerful and almost charm-like evocativeness that it's absolutely crucial to the poem.
The poet's hands are not invisible.
She's, yes, and her voice, the poet's voice is not invisible. It doesn't stay behind any kind of impersonality. And she's just a great performer of her work, and you can hear many recordings of hers on PennSound. In fact, I think this was recorded at a close listening session of interview and a studio recording that I did with her, but she's one of the most charismatic poetry performers of my contemporaries or of this time, and you can hear that in the recording. So the Invisible Hands has two. You could read this poem, and I read it, and I didn't think about anything. I didn't need to comment on it, but when you asked me to speak about it,
did I cause you to think about a poem you hadn't?
Well, often I wonder, you really need to say, what do you need to say about something? And then it turns out, of course, there's all kinds of things that I'm aware of that I know myself that somebody else may not be, or when thinking about it, it makes more explicit. So this poem really, I'm just saying, to talk about the literary allusions, it's the most traditional thing to say, but there are two important literary allusions in the title, one of which is Adam Smith's Invisible Hand, the other of which is Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. And it's about kind of a combination of those two things. And when you have those two vectors in your mind, the poem really just, it is worthwhile.
It is the perfect synthesis of those two things.
It is worthwhile knowing that when you're reading the poem.
Let's talk about Adam Smith.
So do you want, I can summarize it, but you're...
Yeah. No, I think we can do it together.
Yeah.
What did Smith mean?
Well, so Wealth of Nations, 1776, a famous year here in the United States and in Philadelphia. I don't know a lot about Adam Smith, but I know what I don't like. What I like, it became more of an issue in our post-war period, the Invisible Hand. It's not clear that he himself had such a strong sense of it. But his basic idea was the capital, if you don't regulate markets or even interest rates, you just let capitalism run on its own steam in freedom, laissez-faire, that the consumer, that the choices that people buying things, could say consumers, but the choices that people buy will regulate the market itself and create optimum prices. And now this is
an unregulated economy, okay?
Yeah, right. And
but the hand.
And the invisible hand is the idea that people, everyday people, in what they buy, ultimately will create a better economy than the government interfering and putting price controls on things or interest controls.
The hand of controls is bad. The people in a market voting with their feet, as it were, will make things profitable. Right? But there's also, in the original Adam Smith, a deistic quality to the idea of the invisible.
Right, well, of course, that's right.
God, it's the clock, you just, the clock gets wound and God will take care of things.
Right. But Adam Smith certainly doesn't have in mind the economy of the 19th or the 20th century, much less the 21st century. And that the concept of invisible hand has been used for laissez-faire economics in a way that I wouldn't want to attribute, because for one thing, the deistic idea is not present. It's an idea that leads to, can I say this without being too reductive in this context? It leads to money flowing from the people that create it, the workers, into the people who own it, the 1%. That's what unregulated markets do nowadays. And that's what Erica Hunt, although she doesn't say anything nearly so crass as that.
Well, she's turning the phrase around, Charles, of course.
That's what she's getting at.
Let's talk about the hands who make these things, Gap jeans, rugby polo shirts, dolls with features, etc., who make these things, who are not seen, not known.
All right, so one thing is, we should also mention Ralph Ellison, Invisible Man,
now
which
let's
I'll
go to
give
Ellison.
to you.
Well, Invisible
what
Man
is Invisible Man for Ralph Ellison?
So Ralph Ellison's arguably only novel. He had a second one that he never quite finished. And this was a difficult, well, I'm going to go deep into this, but I don't want to. This was a difficult thing to have done because Ellison was affiliated with the literary left in the 1930s. By the time he gets to his novel, he's wrestling with the relationship between his feelings about how, as particularly a black proletariat has been treated, in combination with his interest in modernist novelistic ideas.
Yeah.
And so his character is a narrator who has been rendered invisible not simply by racism, but by choice. So
right.
He is.
So it's a fascinating in terms of Erica Hunt as a poet and the complex. I mean, this is not in a way it's the simplest, most, you can't miss it. And in another way, it could read to people as being a very elusive, abstract, modernist, difficult poem. Although it isn't really any of those things, but it's not a conventional poem that says what we're saying, yeah. And perhaps that's a kind of a connection that Hunt is making with Ellison. But at some level, invisible is the people who make things are not seen. They're not valued, and it's not hand. It's hands. Multiple yes. people are making things. The first stanza, though, actually, when you first start to hear it, it almost sounds like the consumers that Smith is talking about, who are making, to some degree, frivolous things with the consumer choice. The poem evolves, but the first one you almost think that it's consumer choice when you go shopping at a department store. So it's kind of it's an amusing comment about what consumer choice is in an age of advertising and buying things that you don't need, because presumably Adam Smith had in mind that people would buy things that they needed. Also chooses the term chain, which I think and which I think is extremely important, because in economics you have supply chains, trading chains. It's all viewed in terms of chains. Plus, she also suggests a kind of global warming too, that the monsoons in June, the fluke of the weather, the storm of flowers. So there's these other invisible things, the invisible hand of global warming, which right. is not doing stuff for good. So her idea is that this idea of the invisible hand, everything's going to take care of itself. Industrialization also, without regulation, produce catastrophe for the planet, because there wasn't regulation.
Well, Charles, that I asked you a question at the beginning that you, in a Bernsteinian way, ignored in favor of giving us, an overview. Yeah. So now I'm back, because I sort of asked it prematurely, mm-hmm. because this last part suggests, in the text here it says until hands can be detected in a bric-a-brac of the world. In the reading she gave, I can't remember what the word is, but it's similar, until or as a result, in conclusion. So is it the case that a better world, making the invisible more visible, being seen, mm-hmm. to use a phrase that's common now, is a moment when those hands that made these things can be detected in the bric-a-brac of the world? So bric-a-brac. You and I know that bric-a-brac is another illusion. It's an allusion to an argument that Wallace Stevens and Robert Frost had. Is this ringing a bell? Yeah. So, Stevens said to Frost, basically, your poem, I'm probably misquoting this, but he basically said, oh, your poems are about, fields and pastures. And Frost said, well, your poems are about bric-a-brac, which was an anti-modernist statement on his part. So now I ask you, what is Erica saying about the moment of reclamation and of anti-invisibility, of the recovery of invisibility that has to do with the bric-a-brac of the world? This poem would be nothing without bric-a-brac. It's ship the ink, jump the rope, rip the chute, lay the trail, time the tear, eye the glass. That's the bric-a-brac that is the texture of the language. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, I think the poem itself is in a way reclaiming the repressed by acknowledgement. In this case, sound, which is one of the most repressed elements within poetry. The very idea that what's high poetry doesn't have this level of sound play. This level of sound play is viewed as being, again, a doggerel or children's rhymes, or maybe hip hop or rap, but not high art.
Yes.
So you want to bring the sound play in.
This is a child's poetry. Right. Finally at the end, right? There's the or it's the shoulder bones connected to the such and such.
Well, actually, you've got to go back a second, because the poem turns in the middle to make very explicit that invisible hands do all these things. And that's where you get all these fantastic rhymes, rice and spice and so on. Almost like overdetermined rhymes. Every phrase rhymes with the phrase before. And it comes from the house that Jack built. This is the house that Jack built.
It's the house that Jack built, right? And that's actually, if you read,
this is the house
that Jack built is the connectedness, that the whole problem of connections here, right? You assert connections so you see how it is that the house that Jack built actually got set up in an economic system that depends on connections, cause and effect, that then obscures the cause and effect, because otherwise the people who made things would not be given credit. Right. And Jack didn't really build that house. The system built that house. So bric-a-brac, how do we deal with that? What is the valence of bric-a-brac?
So bric-a-brac also, I think of the spoils of Poynton in Henry James.
I can't believe you're referring to the Henry James minor novel, a short novel in the late 1890s called The Spoils of Poynton. I can't believe you're mentioning this.
Well, because it's about bric-a-brac. It's about antiques. It's about a certain kind of...
But bric-a-bracs are worse than good antiques.
But bric-a-brac, right. Yeah, well, I mean, Henry James wouldn't have thought of it as bric-a-brac, but if you think of it as bric-a-brac, then when you're moving in, your relative stuff, you throw it out, whereas Henry James has this deep sense of, it's culturally violent not to respect the antiques.
Especially because his novel gets filled with the words of all that stuff.
Yeah, and there's the stuff. So bric-a-brac
is pre-modern.
Erica Hunt says that in her introduction. It's a poem about stuff. What do we do with all this stuff? With things, the thingification.
We need to respect the fact that invisible hands made the things before we turn up our noses before we read. I can't remember the Japanese-American, the anti-cluttering, the decluttering queen, that thing. Before we go in for that, we have to respect the fact that the stuff that we put in our houses that Jack built is to be respected.
Well, and they're things that are made, that the choice of citizens is what they make and what they have. And that it has to be understood not as an invisible chain which robs people of their economics and also of their taste, but also as something that creates value, to go back to that Marxist sense of the theory of value. That's what's great. Yeah. So bric-a-brac is funny because poems are kind of bric-a-brac. Bric-a-brac is also the kind of rhyme that Hunt otherwise uses in the poem. Rip the chute, lay the trail, time the tear, eye the gut. She's almost created a bric-a-brac-y, bat the wing, a bric-a-brac-y kind of sound.
Yes, 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 yes.
But bric-a-brac is, as you're saying, unlike in The Spoils the Point, bric-a-brac is devalued clutter. And she's saying we have to recognize the bric-a-brac of our own lives, that our lives are bric-a-brac, and that the devaluation of certain things is the problem, because it takes into it removes the makers, the people who make things, and that you can't have consumption without making. So, I mean, this is a poem very much of the late 20th century and early 21st century, in the sense that it's concerned about the way in which all things are turned into commodities, and that are removed from their makers, and also removed from the needs of the people who are getting them.
Okay.
And that unless we reverse that, we will be doomed to these cycles, these chains.
We have to be careful in reversing it, because if we reverse it and clean up everything, get rid of the bric-a-brac, get rid of the stuff we don't really need, get rid of the overabundance, we're in danger of denuding what the speaker can bring to what a poem can bring to us, the stuff that a poem can bring to us.
Right.
So we can't be very purist about the anti-capitalism here. We have to respect the fact that, like it or not, this stuff got made. So, for instance, at the bottom of the first page in our text, when the list stuff, the House that Jack built stuff, turns toward the meta-poetic and the meta-sound, the meta-oral, carry the thread the vowels, stall the calls, pour the molds, powder the walls, dent the bins, stamp the bills, core the questions, comma the nouns, time the charts. It reminds us that this is the stuff that's in a poem. And if we cleaned it all up and we did the pure anti-capitalist thing, our poems, your poems wouldn't exist anymore.
Well, my poems are celebrations of bric-a-brac, celebrations, as is this poem.
Because they sound so good.
In its own way. But, she's very explicit about this in the, until hands can be detected.
Yes.
In the bric-a-brac of the world. Yes. So hands are detected in the bric-a-brac of the world. For example, if you're holding it, in your hand,
yes,
then it's another way that bric-a-brac is detected. If it's part of your life, it's not removed, not put into this kind of system of chains and production. So it's the intervention of the human hand, and of course the intervention of the human hand is, it's one of those Lakoffian deep metaphors, and I hadn't really thought about it before, and I'm reluctant to even mention it in this case, but the hand is also that which liberates, as in emancipation.
Yes.
And it's a fundamental way of understanding when we see the hand that's of the people or of a person, that it can be a liberatory hand.
It's an argument against Smith. There is a role for the hand of government. In the context of the poetry of the 1930s, we needed the hand of the government to lift up, literally lift up artists who had lost their jobs. I mean, let's riff a little more on this mug. And I'll ask Zach to focus on the mug. Okay, so that mug sitting there, it's probably not handmade. But what's the difference between that and some speaker of a poem describing that? On one hand, and this on the other, which is the idea that you suggested. This is the detection of the hand, and this is a revelation of the connection that someone has to something that got made. If you get rid of the bric-a-brac, in this case, you get rid of the connection between the person that holds the mug or made the mug, cares about the mug, or gets the utility from the mug, which would be quite now cold, bad Kelly Writer's House coffee. But my point is that she is saying, detect the relationship. Don't get rid of the
it's also
bric-a-brac.
everything is in a chain. And going back to the idea of which she's turning around, that economic language of the chain, and the poem is filled with these changes that are torquing. So the bric-a-brac, as well as the poem, as well as what we buy, is part of a human chain of making, rather than something that's broken off and that operates in an invisible way. It's only when we see the hands in the chain that we are not, and this is her pun, are not in chain. She uses the term. She turns the term chain into a chain in an incarcerating sense.
Yeah.
Chained to the economic system. How do we get free from being chained to the economic system, much less chained to systems of oppression or slavery? But only the hand can do that, to emancipate us from it. So it is a poem about emancipation. It's very specifically cites emancipation by making visible. But she also has an interesting pun where she says to make visible the invisible, and that I like very much. So it's not to eliminate. Right. It's not to make everything visible, but it's to make the invisibility visible, and that's what all the sound play does. It makes the connections between things that don't seem to be connected apparent, because puns and sound plays do that.
Yes, Invisible Man, the person, the protagonist in the story, and the narrator is not so much interested in making invisibility go away as to make his invisibility visible to us, to sustain the invisibility, because it's a state of being. All right, we're going to conclude by talking about sound, the connections, the chains, the supply chain of sound, which in a way is a hedge against easy anti-capitalism, because it's there. And it establishes the connection through the sound of words. So I would love to invite you to read the stanza that starts, "Invisible man's milk the spill." Actually, would you read the two stanzas?
Right. Well,
Invisible
that's
hands rice the peas, and then the second, those two, and then we'll end by talking about how important the sound is here.
Yeah, I mean, these are, so these stanzas are the musical core of the great chain of not great chain of being, but the great
chain of being. Why not?
But also the great chain of making.
Yeah.
And which is poesis, making. That making is what creates value. Yeah. There's a wonderful line that Zukowski has in A9, which comes from Marx and Spinoza, but from Marx in that case, the general theory of value. Hands, hearts, not value made us. Always think about that line, hands, hearts, not value. But there's hands right there.
They are.
So value isn't something abstract or invisible that controls. Value is something that's made by people in their interactions, exchange value.
That is very
Value is made by you and I sitting here with Zach, and we mentioning Zach and the lights
Zach
and
is
the camera.
right now,
yes,
though.
but we're making him visible. That's what the value. This isn't some. We're not in some decontextualized space.
Yes.
We are old friends. We've talked forever. The value is, and by the way, here's a.
You're not going to read these things.
For ModPo. For ModPo. Al's radical pedagogy in his book coming up.
You're referring to me in the third person.
Yes.
Call me Al.
Al's radical pedagogy.
That would be me.
In ModPo is to say that the value of poems is not in the poems themselves only. It's not in the expertise of talking heads like me who know a lot about it, that the people listening, but it's in the relationship that people have talking together with the poem in hand. And that unless you can hear the poem in hand, and unless you can hear people talking about the poem in relation to their own thinking and having somebody else respond, you have to have at least those multiple elements, the poem, the reader, somebody listening to the poem, somebody listening to the other readers. That is what exchange value is, and that's where value comes from. It's not in the words in the poem. Right. It's in the exchange value that the poem has in a conversation about it.
So the meta-pedagogical point that you're making is that getting your hands around a poem and claiming that the poem, that you are part of the making or the co-creation of a poem, is very much an effort at making visible the invisible hands of the readers who hold books and who hold poems in their hands.
Right. So you're avoiding, is another fancy term, reification of the poem. Reification of the poem is the greatest barrier to people reading poems. And reification means making something into a thing.
That's right.
Like a commodity.
That
And
it-
he's
that
taking
is not
something that's in
yours.
exchange, making it into it. And reification in poetry often comes from the expert who reads the poems in a profound way and is distant from you and in awe, whereas everything you do in ModPo is to break that down, because that's the only way you can actually experience what the poem
Right.
is.
Right. So, to stick with Marx for a second, the whole problem of alienation, right, is what you just described. To be alienated from a poem, to be alienated from a piece of culture, is to be have it delivered to you so that your hands don't matter. There is a gesture of what we're talking about now in a reader's response to a poem is an effort at creating an unalienated labor of participating in what a poem means.
And that's a beautiful way of understanding Invisible Hands as going back to Erica's performance, and also this absolutely extravagant and delightful sound play in the kind of, which is like children's rhymes in some ways, but it's what's great about children's rhymes too, that they call them nonsense, but they're not nonsense. It's all the other stuff that's nonsense.
That's right. That's right.
And but nonetheless, they're intoxicating and they're drunken because they just get carried up. But in this case, that tumbling in this poem is about all the different things that lead one thing to another and another thing, which create community, which create value.
Beautiful.
It's actually what creates value.
This is why I love you, because you say things like this. Now you're going.
And Eric
we are going to conclude, right? We're actually going to conclude. I'm going to ask you to read the two stanzas: "Invisible hands rice the peas," down to "Rhyme the orange, toast the storage," and then I am going to conclude by saying something about the phrase "rhyme the orange." You go.
So the invisible hand rice and invisible hands milk; those two are the ones after.
The two stanzas here. These two stanzas.
Yeah.
right
Okay. Yeah. Because we have, by the way, carry the thread the vowels, stall the calls, pour the moles. Vowels. This is very much brings it down to the actually in those wonderful moments in poems where the poem is talking about what it's doing. It is threading the vowels. It's actually doing. When you hear it, she's actually being explicit. This is it. It's threading the vowels. Invisible hands rice the peas, spice the rice, circle the turns. Turn on the presses, raise the letters, letter the spaces, address the edges before they bang into one another, mask the connections. And this actually is also an ars poetica that could also be understood as about a poem. Invisible hands milk the spill, slip the ink, jump the rope, rip the chute, lay the trail, time the tear, eye the glass, bat the wing, bat the lash, brown the tan, fiddle the sticks, ride the herd, read the horde, hear the roar, read the dim, damp the rhyme, rhyme the orange, toast the storage.
My final thought is about rhyme the orange. Famously,
Of course.
you can't rhyme orange. So she is really doing the impossible. Just to cite once again, someone like Ashbery saying why he likes Stein, because she writes what cannot be written.
Right.
I'm interested. She is saying, Erica Hunt is saying, not what can be seen already, but what cannot be seen, what cannot be rhymed, what cannot be said, what cannot be made into sound.
Right, and of course, she does rhyme the orange, and the rhyme is storage.
Yes, she manages to do it. Charles, thank you so much. This was great.